At my daughter's 38th birthday dinner. Her husband slid a loan authorization beneath my hand and told me the bank needed my signature by Monday. When I refused, Caroline looked across the table and said she sometimes wished I had never been my mother. An hour later, she sent me a message. Take back everything you think you own. She believed it was an insult. One more way to accuse me of controlling her life. She did not know those words would lead us to a house full of secrets. $42,000 in hidden debt. And an application to borrow against property she had never owned. But that night, all I understood was that my daughter had found the one sentence she knew would break me. It was the last Friday in August. Warm enough that the restaurant windows had fogged at the edges. We were seated in a private alcove at an upscale restaurant north of Indianapolis. Caroline had chosen it herself. White tablecloths, amber lights, flowers arranged low enough that everyone could admire one another without having to lean sideways. My right knee had been aching since noon. But I kept my smile in place. I had become skilled at hiding pain. Under the table, I shifted my leg and pressed my palm against the joint until the throbbing eased. Inside my purse was a velvet box containing Robert's necklace. The one he had bought on our 25th anniversary. Before he died, he had told me Caroline should have it someday. I had decided that 38 was old enough to understand that a family heirloom was not just jewelry. It was a promise to remember where you came from. Ethan waited until the appetizers arrived before mentioning the roof. The contractor can hold the current price until Monday, he said. After that, we lose the deposit. Caroline lowered her eyes to her wine. That should have warned me. Ethan explained that their savings were tied up in his business and that the bank had offered a refinance option. He spoke quickly, layering one reassuring phrase over another. Temporary. Routine. Low risk. Then he pulled several folded pages from his jacket. All they need is your signature as trustee. I read the first page twice. This isn't a refinance, I said. You can't refinance a loan that doesn't exist. Ethan's jaw tightened. It's basically the same thing. We're accessing the equity. The word equity brought back an email I had received months earlier from the insurance company. Someone had asked to add a bank as a mortgagee on the house policy. The trust had no mortgage, so I had assumed it was an administrative mistake. I'll let Marlene review this, I said, folding the papers. I'm not signing tonight. Ethan leaned back. Of course not. Caroline finally looked at me. What is that supposed to mean? It means your mother never does anything without making sure we remember she has the power. I kept my voice steady. The house belongs to the Whitaker Family Trust. I have legal responsibilities. The house is essentially Caroline's. Ethan said. Everyone knows that. No, I answered. Everyone has been allowed to believe that. Caroline began listing old grievances. The time I questioned an expensive renovation. The afternoon I called twice because Hazel had a fever. The budget spreadsheet I had offered when Ethan's business began struggling. Some of her complaints were fair. I had stepped in too often. But she spoke as if every bill I had paid was evidence against me. Then she said it. Sometimes I wish you had never been my mother. The table went silent. I removed the napkin from my lap and stood carefully, refusing to let my knee betray me. I heard you, I said. I won't argue with you tonight. I left Robert's necklace in my purse. On the drive home, my phone lit up with Caroline's message. Take back everything you think you own. I forwarded it to Marlene without answering. Then I sat in my dark kitchen and wondered when Caroline had stopped seeing me as her mother and started seeing me as the person responsible for the next bill. Marlene called 10 minutes later. Judith, she said quietly, when Caroline says everything, does she know how much of that house still belongs to the trust? Marlene's office occupied the second floor of a converted brick house in downtown Carmel. By 9 Saturday morning, Robert's necklace was still in my purse, and Caroline's message was printed on the table between us. Marlene read it without reacting. Angry words aren't a substitute for proper documentation, she said, and we are not turning this into revenge. She opened the Whitaker family trust file. The deed confirmed that the trust owned the house. The occupancy agreement allowed Caroline and Ethan to live there without paying rent, while they covered utilities and ordinary maintenance. A separate inventory identified the belongings Robert and I had placed in the residence for their use. The list was shorter than Caroline probably imagined. Robert's walnut dining set, a family armoire, 2 separately insured paintings, the living room furniture, a backup generator, his garage tools, and several collectibles. Their beds, dishes, appliances, clothing, and Hazel's belongings were not on it. Neither were the items I had given them as gifts. Marlene turned another page and found the title to the Mercedes. My name appeared under owner. Caroline was only an authorized driver. Then Marlene removed her glasses. When was the last time Caroline faced a problem you didn't solve for her? I wanted to defend myself. Instead, I remembered paying for the roof repair after Ethan's first business setback. I remembered covering an insurance premium they had forgotten and replacing their refrigerator before Caroline had even asked whether it could be repaired. 3 times, I had postponed knee surgery because they needed money. Childcare, or both. I thought I was protecting her. I said. Perhaps you were, but protection without an ending can become dependence. Marlene drafted an email to both Caroline and Ethan. She listed every trust-owned item and asked them to confirm that they wanted those specific belongings removed. She also requested written permission for the movers to enter on Monday. Caroline answered first. Yes, take them Monday. I'm tired of Mom acting like she owns our lives. Ethan replied 8 minutes later. Do whatever you want. On Monday morning, Hazel was at summer camp. I was grateful for that small mercy. I arrived with Marlene, 4 professional movers, a videographer, and printed copies of the inventory and email chain. The moving crew had instructions to touch nothing that was not numbered on the list. Ethan opened the door but planted himself in the entrance. You're not coming in. Marlene held up the emails. Both occupants gave written permission. I changed my mind. He called the police before she could answer. 2 officers arrived 20 minutes later. They made it clear they were not there to decide ownership. They reviewed the documents, asked everyone to remain calm, and explained that their role was only to prevent a confrontation while the agreed items were removed. Ethan stood against the wall with his arms folded as the movers began. The walnut dining table went first. Robert had refinished it by hand after his father died. Watching it pass through the doorway felt less like reclaiming furniture than carrying an old life out of a house that no longer recognized me. In Hazel's room, I noticed the small white desk where she did her homework. I had bought it for her 7th birthday. It was not on the trust inventory. One mover pointed toward it. No, I said, that belongs to Hazel. We also left the beds, kitchen equipment, family photographs, and everything necessary for daily life. I had come to enforce a boundary, not dismantle my granddaughter's home. A vehicle transport service arrived shortly after noon for the Mercedes. Ethan followed us outside. That car was a gift. Marlene handed him a copy of the title and an email he had sent me 2 years earlier. Thank you for letting Caroline use your SUV until we're back on our feet. His expression changed, but he said nothing. By late afternoon, the truck was loaded. I expected to feel vindicated. Instead, when I saw the empty spaces left behind, I felt only tired. Back at Marlene's office, we reviewed the video and checked every item against the inventory. Nothing had been taken by mistake. Then Marlene stopped at an old email from the trust's insurance company. Months earlier, someone had requested that First Meridian Bank be added to the house policy as a mortgagee and loss payee. The Whitaker family trust had never borrowed from that bank. Marlene looked at me across the desk. Judith, I don't think those papers at dinner were Ethan's first attempt. She enlarged the insurance email on her monitor. The request had been submitted 4 months earlier. "Does this prove Ethan applied for a loan?" I asked. "No," she said. "It proves someone gave the bank enough information about the property to trigger an insurance request. We don't know who submitted it, what documents were used, or how far the process went." I wanted certainty. After the dinner, the moving truck, and Ethan's behavior, uncertainty felt almost insulting, but Marlene refused to turn suspicion into accusation. "We proceed with facts," she said. "That protects the trust, and it protects you." That afternoon, she prepared a notice of material breach based on the apparent attempt to use trust property as collateral. The notice required Caroline and Ethan to preserve all related documents and proposed formal mediation. It did not order them out of the house. Under the occupancy agreement, they retained the right to remain there while the dispute was addressed. I agreed not to change the locks, interrupt utilities, or contact Ethan's bank myself. Part of me hated how restrained it all felt. Another part understood that restraint was the only thing separating a boundary from retaliation. When I returned home, the trust-owned furniture had been placed in my unused dining room and garage. Robert's walnut table nearly filled the room. The armoire stood against the wall beside the 2 wrapped paintings, while boxes of his tools were stacked beneath the window. I ran my fingers across the shallow mark on the tabletop where Caroline had dropped a metal toy when she was 6. Robert had refused to sand it away. "A family table should remember the family," he had said. Standing there, I remembered something else he had told me when we created the trust. "We should give Caroline a foundation, Judith, not a life she never has to build." At the time, I had agreed, but after Robert died, helping Caroline had become a way to quiet the emptiness in my own house. Every time she needed me, I felt useful again. I paid for the first roof repair because Ethan's business was new. I covered their insurance when a client failed to pay him. I watched Hazel so Caroline could work, then paid the expense that made the extra work necessary in the first place. None of those choices had felt unreasonable alone. Together, they had taught Caroline that emergencies belonged to me. In my kitchen drawer, beneath takeout menus and expired coupons, I found 3 appointment cards from my orthopedic surgeon. Each date had been crossed out. The first time, Caroline needed help with Hazel during summer break. The second, Ethan said the business could recover if I covered one more expense. The third, Caroline cried because she could not manage my recovery on top of everything else. I had called the doctor and postponed my own life. On Thursday evening, my phone rang from a number I did not recognize. "Grandma?" Hazel's voice was small and hurried. She was calling from her friend Ava's phone. "Dad says you're taking the house," she whispered. "He says we might not have anywhere to live." The old instinct rose immediately. I wanted to promise that I would fix everything. I wanted to tell her Ethan was lying. Instead, I sat down and chose each word carefully. "Adults are sorting out an adult problem," I said. "You have a home right now, and the grown-ups will make sure you are cared for. None of this is your fault." "Are you mad at Mom?" "I love your mother. And I love you. You never have to choose between loving your parents and loving me." Hazel was quiet for several seconds. "Can I still call you?" "Always." After we hung up, I cried, not because Ethan had spoken badly about me, but because Hazel had already begun carrying a fear that belonged to the adults around her. The next morning, I told Marlene what had happened. She documented it but advised me not to confront Ethan. Our priority was keeping Hazel outside the financial dispute. Before ending the call, Marlene mentioned one more detail. First Meridian Bank, the institution named in the insurance email, was the same bank printed across the papers Ethan had placed beside my wineglass at Caroline's birthday dinner. His request that night had not been the beginning. Someone had been trying to reach the equity in that house for months. I did not know what happened inside Caroline's home during the following week. she told me much later. After enough time had passed for both of us to speak without turning every memory into a weapon. The morning after Hazel called me, Caroline placed a printed copy of the insurance email on the kitchen counter. Why did First Meridian contact the insurance company 4 months ago? Ethan barely looked at it. It was a pre-qualification request. For a loan against the house? For options, he said. Nothing was finalized. Caroline reminded him that the house belonged to the trust. Ethan sighed as if she were repeating something childish. The trust is just an estate planning structure. Your parents created it to avoid probate. Your mom always intended to transfer the deed to you. When? She said after 5 years. Caroline tried to remember that promise. She could recall Ethan mentioning it many times. But she could not remember hearing the words directly from me. He told her I had changed my mind after Robert died because keeping the house in the trust gave me leverage. According to Ethan, I wanted them grateful, dependent, and slightly afraid that I might take everything away. It was an explanation Caroline had accepted because parts of it were true. I had questioned their renovations. I had asked to see estimates before paying for repairs. I had reminded them that the house belonged to the trust whenever a disagreement became financial. What Ethan never mentioned was that Caroline had signed the occupancy agreement herself. She remembered being pregnant with Hazel, tired and overwhelmed, while Ethan guided her through the pages. He described the document as temporary paperwork allowing them to live there until the deed transferred. She signed where he pointed and never read it again. For 8 years, Ethan handled everything related to the house. Property tax notices went to me as trustee. Insurance documents were sent electronically. Utility bills appeared in their shared account. And Ethan paid them. Whenever Caroline asked about paperwork, he said he had taken care of it. That week, she began asking herself questions she should have asked years earlier. Why had she never signed a mortgage? Why had she never received a deed? Why did she have no record of a transfer date? Why had every promise about the house come from Ethan instead of me? On Wednesday evening, Leah Morgan called. Leah had been Caroline's closest friend since college and one of the first people to believe that I used money to control my daughter. She had encouraged Caroline to establish boundaries with me. Sometimes, she had even helped Caroline prepare what to say. I need to show you something, Leah said. She forwarded a series of messages from Ethan. The earliest ones sounded almost reasonable. Caroline needs to stop feeling guilty every time she asks her mother for help. Judith makes every gift feel like a contract. Ethan had asked Leah to remind Caroline that a married woman should not need her mother's approval. Leah believed she was helping her friend become independent. But the language changed over time. Judith has never let Caroline face a real consequence. Why would this time be different? Then, if Caroline keeps her distance for a while, Judith will eventually offer something to bring her back. And finally, Caroline needs to decide whether she's a wife first or a daughter first. I thought he was trying to protect you, Leah said. I didn't understand that he was using me to keep you angry. Caroline wanted to blame Leah, but the messages revealed something more painful. Ethan had not created every resentment she felt toward me. He had taken real frustrations and arranged them into a story where he was the only person she could trust. Caroline had accepted that story because it excused her from looking too closely at the life we had financed together. She wanted to believe the house was hers. She wanted to believe my caution was selfishness. Most of all, she wanted to believe that accepting years of help did not create any responsibility to understand where that help came from. That night, she waited until Hazel was asleep. Ethan was in the den, working on his laptop. Caroline stood in the doorway with the insurance email in one hand and Leah's messages open on her phone. Did you apply for a loan against the house? Ethan looked at her, then closed the laptop. He did not say no. He did not call the email a mistake. Instead, He rubbed both hands across his face and said the words that changed the question from whether he had lied to how much he had hidden. "I was trying to save us." 2 days later, Ethan left the house to meet with an attorney. Caroline waited until his truck disappeared before entering the den. She later told me she had not planned to search the room. She only wanted a copy of the document he had brought to my birthday dinner. But the desk drawer where Ethan kept financial records was locked. For years, he had called it his business drawer. Caroline had respected that boundary because she believed privacy was one of the ways a wife showed trust. Now trust felt like a word Ethan had taught her to use whenever he needed her not to look. She found a small spare key inside an old ceramic bowl on the bookshelf. The drawer opened with almost no resistance. Inside were 3 credit cards she had never seen. Each was in Ethan's name. But the statements had been mailed to a post office box across town. 2 cards were near their limits. The third had been used almost entirely for cash advances. Caroline spread the statements across the floor and began adding the numbers. $42,000. There were withdrawals from their joint emergency fund, charges from casinos in Indiana and Ohio, and payments to online betting services. Money Caroline believed had been spent on rising household costs had disappeared in increments small enough to escape notice until the total became impossible to ignore. Beneath the statements was a letter from First Meridian Bank denying a home equity line of credit. The accompanying application identified Ethan as an owner of the house. Caroline found a copy of the trust certification attached behind it. The original document named the Whitaker Family Trust as the property owner and me as trustee. In Ethan's version, several lines had been altered to suggest he was authorized to seek financing connected to the property. He had not merely misunderstood the trust. He had tried to make the bank misunderstand it too. When Ethan returned, Caroline was sitting at the kitchen table. The documents were arranged in careful rows in front of her. He stopped in the doorway. "You went through my desk. You applied for a loan against my mother's trust. I was going to tell you. When I had a solution." Caroline held up one of the statements. Was $42,000 not enough time to find one? For several minutes, Ethan said nothing. Then the explanations came. His construction business had begun failing 18 months earlier. One major client refused to pay. 2 projects went over budget. Ethan used credit cards to cover payroll because he believed the next contract would repair the damage. Then someone invited him to a casino. He won nearly $8,000 in one weekend. For a brief moment, the impossible seemed manageable. He believed he could win enough to replace the missing business funds before Caroline learned anything was wrong. But he lost the winnings. Then he lost more trying to recover them. The lies grew around the debt like walls. Every new loan was supposed to be the final one. Every withdrawal was meant to buy enough time for him to become the man Caroline thought she had married. "I wasn't trying to steal a house," he said. "I was trying to fix everything before you found out how badly I had failed." Caroline's voice was quieter when she answered. "You weren't protecting us from failure. You were protecting yourself from shame." Ethan sat across from her and insisted the home equity loan would have lowered the interest rate. He said the house would eventually belong to Caroline anyway. In his mind, he had only been borrowing from their future. Then he asked her to call me. "Your mother can clear this without even feeling it," he said. "One loan, one signature. We keep Hazel's life stable. And I'll get treatment." Caroline stared at him. He was using their daughter's safety the same way he had used my love, as collateral. She called me after midnight. Her breathing was uneven, and for several seconds she could not speak. When she finally told me what she had found, I stood so quickly that pain shot through my knee. I reached for my car keys. I imagined bringing her and Hazel home, hiring the best attorney, and paying whatever amount would make the danger disappear. Then I remembered Marlene's question. When had Caroline last faced a problem I did not solve? I set the keys down. I love you, I said. I will sit beside you while you decide. But I won't pay this debt. Choose your lawyer, or decide whether you stay with him. Her silence hurt more than anger would have. Then what am I supposed to do? The first thing you choose without me. After we hung up, Caroline did not return to the kitchen where Ethan was waiting. She closed the bedroom door, sat on the floor with the documents around her, and called an attorney of her own. Her attorney instructed her not to sign anything, move money she did not clearly own, or confront Ethan again without preserving the documents first. By sunrise, Caroline had photographed every page from the locked drawer and stored copies in 2 secure locations. She opened an individual checking account using only her employment income and changed the passwords to her email, phone account, and retirement plan. She ordered her credit reports, half expecting to discover debts in her own name. None appeared, but the relief was incomplete. Ethan had not stolen her identity. He had simply built a financial life beside hers and made sure she never looked closely enough to see it. Caroline contacted Hazel's school and confirmed the list of adults authorized to pick her up. She was not trying to keep Ethan from their daughter, but she no longer trusted informal arrangements. Every decision concerning Hazel would now be documented. Ethan moved into the guest room. Caroline did not immediately file for divorce. Her attorney advised her that she did not need to decide the future of her marriage while still learning the truth about its past. For the first time, Caroline allowed a question to remain unanswered without asking me to answer it for her. 2 evenings later, she sat with Hazel on the edge of her bed. "Grandma didn't take our home away," Caroline said. "Your dad and I made some adult decisions, and now we have to fix them." Hazel looked down at her hands. "Dad said Grandma wanted us gone. Grandma is protecting something that belongs to the family. I should never have let you believe this was your fault or hers." "Is Grandma still mad?" "She's hurt, and I hurt her." Caroline apologized for allowing Hazel to hear arguments about the house. She promised that no one would ask her to choose sides or carry messages between adults. Through our attorneys, Caroline and I began arranging a structured schedule so Hazel could see me again once the immediate conflict had settled. Meanwhile, I discovered that setting a boundary once did not make the old habits disappear. When Marlene told me Caroline might need a deposit for temporary housing, I wrote a check for $5,000. I placed it inside an envelope, wrote Caroline's name across the front, and left it on my kitchen counter. For 2 days, I passed that envelope each time I made coffee. I told myself the money was for Hazel. I told myself Caroline had already suffered enough. I told myself one final rescue would not undo everything I had learned. But every excuse ended in the same place: Caroline waiting for me to make the danger smaller. On the 3rd morning, I tore up the check. Instead, I emailed her a list of affordable townhouses near Hazel's school, a nonprofit credit counseling service, and 2 local legal assistance programs. I did not call to explain. I did not ask whether she had received it. Caroline replied with 2 words: "Thank you." She eventually found a 2-bedroom townhouse 12 minutes from Hazel's school. It had no garage, the kitchen cabinets were outdated, and the carpet upstairs needed cleaning. But the rent fit the budget she had built with her attorney and a financial counselor. She paid the deposit from her personal savings. At the nonprofit where she worked, Caroline requested full-time hours. Her supervisor could not offer them immediately but gave her responsibility for an upcoming fundraising program and several additional paid shifts. The changes were modest. No dramatic new job appeared. No unexpected inheritance solved the problem. Caroline simply began constructing a life from the resources she actually had. Ethan reacted by becoming unusually cooperative. He attended one counseling appointment and told Caroline he was willing to seek treatment. He also continued insisting that the loan application had been a desperate financial strategy, not an attempt to deceive anyone. He believed Caroline would support his position during mediation. They were still married. They still lived under the same roof. To him, that meant they remained one side of the dispute, with the trust, and me, on the other. Caroline did not correct him. On the morning of mediation, I arrived with Marlene at a neutral office in Indianapolis. Ethan was already there with his attorney. An empty chair stood beside him, clearly intended for Caroline. He glanced toward the entrance when the elevator doors opened. Caroline stepped out carrying a document box. An attorney walked beside her. Ethan stood. "What is this?" Caroline did not answer. She crossed the room and sat at a separate table. Only then did Ethan seem to understand that the woman he had expected to defend him had come with independent counsel. Caroline placed the box containing the credit card statements, HELOC application, altered trust certification, and Leah's messages on the table. For the first time since the birthday dinner, Ethan was no longer the person deciding which version of the truth everyone else would hear. Howard Bennett, the mediator, began by reminding us that he was not a judge. "I'm not here to declare a winner," he said. "I'm here to determine whether you can reach an agreement before this dispute becomes more expensive and more damaging." Marlene spoke first. She presented the deed showing the Whitaker family trust as the owner of the house, followed by the occupancy agreement Caroline and Ethan had signed 8 years earlier. The agreement permitted them to live there without rent, but it did not promise a future transfer of ownership. It also prohibited either occupant from using the property as collateral. Ethan's attorney argued that the arrangement was not as simple as the documents suggested. Caroline and Ethan had maintained the house, raised their daughter there, and made decisions based on the expectation that Caroline would eventually receive it. "An expectation is not a deed," Marlene said. Howard raised one hand. "This is not a courtroom. Both positions have now been stated." He divided us into separate rooms. Marlene and I sat in a small conference room with a window overlooking a parking garage. Howard asked what outcome I wanted. "I want the trust protected." "Is that all?" I thought of Hazel calling from Ava's phone. I thought of Caroline crying after midnight and of the check I had torn apart. "I don't want my granddaughter destroyed by this." Howard nodded. "You appear to have strong ownership documents. But strong documents do not prevent a lawsuit. And a lawsuit does not protect a child from hearing adults turn one another into enemies." He reminded me that boundaries did not require destruction. I could protect the trust without humiliating Caroline or forcing Hazel into an emergency. Before leaving, he asked one final question. "Are you trying to preserve the trust, Judith, or punish the people who made you feel foolish for creating it?" The question stayed with me. Later, Marlene told me what Howard had communicated in Ethan's room. The trust's ownership claim was well documented. Any argument based on an informal promise carried significant risk. More seriously, the loan application and altered trust certification could create consequences beyond the housing dispute. Howard did not accuse Ethan of a crime. He simply told him that a court, lender, or investigator might view the documents less generously than Ethan did. Ethan could not rely on my desire to protect Hazel as a guarantee that I would protect him. When the joint session resumed, Caroline's attorney opened the document box. One by one, she placed the evidence on the table. The HELOC denial, the 3 hidden credit card accounts, the cash advances, the post office box, the casino statements, the altered trust certification, and Ethan's messages to Leah. Ethan stared at Caroline. "You said this was about the house." "No," she answered. "The house was only where the lies became visible." She acknowledged that I had made it easy for her to avoid responsibility. I had paid bills she should have learned to manage and stepped into problems before she had tried solving them herself. Then she faced Ethan. "My mother made it too easy for me to avoid growing up. But you used that weakness to control both of us." Ethan argued that every decision had been made to preserve their family. Caroline did not raise her voice. You lied because I made it comfortable for you to lie. I didn't ask questions because I liked the life those lies protected. That part belongs to me. It was the first time I had heard my daughter accept responsibility without immediately handing part of it back to someone else. Negotiations continued for nearly 4 hours. By evening, we signed a memorandum of settlement. Ethan relinquished any claim to the house and agreed not to access trust records or communicate with lenders about trust property. Caroline and Hazel would have 90 days to relocate. The remaining trust-owned items would be inventoried without another confrontation. No one would discuss the dispute negatively in front of Hazel or use her to carry messages. Issues involving divorce, custody, gambling debts, or possible financial misconduct would be handled separately. I would not pay Ethan's debts, Caroline's legal fees, or any settlement between them. The memorandum did not forgive anyone. It simply created enough space for consequences to occur without becoming chaos. Before we left, I asked to speak with Caroline privately. If you and Hazel need more time, I said, the trust could offer you a written lease. No promises about ownership, just a legal place to stay while you decide. For one dangerous second, I wanted her to accept. It would have brought Hazel closer and made me useful again. Caroline looked toward the document box. If I stay because you make it easy again, neither of us will know whether I've changed. She told me she had already placed a deposit on the townhouse near Hazel's school. She did not ask me to reimburse her. She did not ask whether the trust would return the deposit later. She simply said, "It's smaller than this house. But it's mine to afford." That was the moment I understood something had shifted. For the first time, Caroline spoke about her future without asking what portion of it I was willing to finance. The 90 days after mediation were quieter than everything that came before them. There were no moving trucks, no police cars, and no dramatic confrontations. Change arrived through ordinary decisions repeated until they began to resemble a new life. Caroline sold the designer handbags she rarely used, several pieces of jewelry, and the oversized dining set that would not fit inside the townhouse. She kept Robert's necklace out of the sale, not because I had finally given it to her, but because it was still resting in the velvet box in my dresser. Some things were not ready to move between us. Her supervisor could not immediately give her a new title, but by taking responsibility for a fundraising program, Caroline moved into full-time hours. She met with a financial counselor and built a budget using only her own income. For the first time, she knew exactly how much money came in, where it went, and what remained. She also began therapy, not to decide whether Ethan was entirely responsible, but to understand why she had surrendered so much of her financial life to him and why she had expected me to protect her from every consequence. She never asked me to pay her attorney. 6 weeks after mediation, Hazel came to my house for the first time since the birthday dinner. When Caroline's car pulled into my driveway, I had to stop myself from rushing outside. I waited by the front door until Hazel climbed from the back seat and ran toward me. I held her without asking what Ethan had said, where he was living, or what Caroline planned to do next. Hazel and I baked cinnamon bread and repotted 2 African violets in the sunroom. She talked about school, a science project, and a classmate who had copied her drawing of the solar system. For 3 hours, we allowed her to be 9 years old. When Caroline returned, our conversation lasted less than a minute. She ate lunch, I said. Her backpack is by the door. Thank you. There was no apology yet, and I did not demand one. Trust rebuilt under pressure would only become another form of debt. On the 87th day, Caroline and Hazel moved into the townhouse. The kitchen cabinets were still outdated, and the upstairs carpet had been professionally cleaned but not replaced. Hazel chose the smaller bedroom because its window faced a maple tree. Caroline stood in the empty living room. surrounded by boxes she had packed herself. "It isn't the home I thought I deserved," she told me later. "It's the first one I can honestly say I can afford." Ethan moved into a rented apartment across town. During the divorce negotiations, Caroline's attorney documented that most of the hidden debt had been created through gambling and concealed from the family. The accounts were in Ethan's name. The statements went to his post office box. And the money had not benefited the household. The law did not automatically erase Caroline's connection to every marital debt. But Ethan agreed to assume most of the repayment obligation rather than risk a deeper investigation into the loan documents. The court later approved their settlement. He entered a gambling treatment program and began attending a support group. His visits with Hazel followed a predictable schedule. Treatment did not restore the marriage or erase what he had done. It was simply the first responsible choice he made after the truth became unavoidable. Once Caroline moved out, the trust rented the house to another family under a standard lease. The rent covered taxes, insurance, and maintenance. The property stopped functioning as a promise Caroline was waiting to inherit and became what Robert and I had intended: a stable asset protected for the future. I sold the Mercedes privately. After the remaining registration costs and sale expenses, I used most of the proceeds to open a 529 college savings account for Hazel. Caroline established a small automatic monthly contribution of her own. Then I called my orthopedic surgeon. The receptionist still remembered me. "Are we rescheduling again?" she asked gently. "No," I said. "This time I'm keeping it." My surgery was scheduled for January. Caroline offered to handle my recovery. But I refused to let either of us return to the old pattern. "You can help Tuesday and Thursday," I said. "June has the other days. And if it becomes too much, you tell me before you're overwhelmed." Caroline nodded. "I'll ask before I assume." On the morning of surgery, she arrived before sunrise. She carried my overnight bag but did not check its contents. She asked whether I wanted help getting into the car and waited for my answer. As we drove toward the hospital, neither of us mentioned the house, the trust, or the money. I watched the winter streets pass beneath the pale morning light and understood that accepting care was not the same as creating dependence. For the first time, I allowed my daughter to help me without turning her kindness into a debt either of us would someday have to repay. 11 months after Caroline's birthday dinner, I could walk several blocks without stopping. My new knee still felt stiff in the mornings. But the deep, grinding pain that had shaped my days for years was gone. Caroline never missed one of her monthly contributions to Hazel's college account. The amount was modest, especially compared with what I had deposited after selling the Mercedes. But that made it more meaningful. She was not contributing from abundance. She was making room for Hazel's future inside a budget that required sacrifice. She never asked for the Mercedes back. She never asked what the trust planned to do with the house. She never suggested that Hazel deserved to inherit it. Our relationship improved through small, almost unremarkable moments. Caroline drove me to 2 physical therapy appointments but waited until I asked. We shared several short dinners. Sometimes she brought Hazel to my house and stayed for coffee. Other times she left after confirming the pickup time. She no longer treated help as something that could be assumed. I no longer offered it before she had the opportunity to ask. Near the end of July, Caroline invited me to meet her at a quiet cafe near the nonprofit where she worked. She was already seated when I arrived, with a thick envelope beside her cup. "I wrote this 3 times," she said. "The first version blamed Ethan. The second blamed you. This is the first one that tells the truth about me." Inside were 600 pages. Caroline did not ask me to read them in front of her. But I did. She wrote that Ethan had manipulated her understanding of the trust. But he had not created every resentment she felt. He had taken frustrations that were real and used them to protect his lies. She admitted that she had preferred his version because it allowed her to see my caution as control and my money as something she had already earned by being my daughter. She apologized for the words she had spoken at the restaurant. "Ethan taught me what to believe about you. But he didn't force those words out of my mouth. I chose them because I knew exactly where they would hurt." She apologized for allowing Hazel to become part of our conflict. When I kept her away, I told myself I was protecting her. I was really using her absence to make you feel the loss I was feeling. I hurt both of you because I wanted you to hurt too. She acknowledged that she had wanted the house not because she had earned it, but because ownership would have guaranteed that someone else remained responsible for her security. She apologized for accepting help without learning how much it cost me, not only financially, but physically. She had known about my knee. She had simply believed my needs could wait because they always had. When I finished, neither of us spoke for a while. Then I told her my part. I made being needed the proof that I was loved. I said, "Every time I rescued you, I took away one more reason for you to trust yourself." I admitted that after Robert died, her emergencies had given structure to my loneliness. Paying her bills made me feel necessary. And whenever she moved toward independence, part of me had feared she was moving away from me. My help was real, I said, but so was the control hidden inside some of it. Caroline reached across the table but stopped before touching my hand. "May I?" I turned my palm upward. "I forgive you," I said, "but forgiveness does not return us to the arrangement that hurt us." "The trust stays the same?" "Yes." "The house?" "Stays in the trust." She nodded. There was sadness in her face, but no anger and no negotiation. "I understand." That was how I knew the apology was different. Caroline had not come to exchange remorse for restored privileges. She had come to accept that some consequences remained even after forgiveness. Before we left, I asked whether she regretted that Hazel would not automatically receive the house. Caroline folded the empty envelope and placed it in her purse. "I'd rather she inherit stability than entitlement," she said. When we returned to my car, I opened the glove compartment and removed the velvet box I had carried to her birthday dinner almost a year earlier. Caroline recognized it immediately. "Mom, I didn't write that letter to get anything back." "I know." I placed the box in her hands. "This was never part of the trust. And it was never payment for being a good daughter. Your father wanted you to have it because you were his daughter." I needed to remember that love and ownership are not the same thing. Caroline opened the box but did not put the necklace on. She held it carefully, as though she finally understood that an heirloom was not proof that the future belonged to her. It was evidence that the past had trusted her to remember it honestly. "Thank you," she said. There was nothing more to negotiate. A few weeks later, Caroline and Hazel came to my house on a warm Sunday afternoon. Hazel carried a paper bag filled with birdseed. Caroline brought a pitcher of lemonade she had made in the small kitchen of her townhouse. My physical therapist had cleared me to walk without a cane, although I still kept it in the hall closet. Sometimes I touched the handle before leaving the house, not because I needed it, but because I remembered the woman who had postponed her own healing 3 times. I did not resent her anymore. She had believed that sacrificing herself was the purest form of love. She simply had not understood how easily sacrifice could become a demand for gratitude. In the backyard, Hazel scattered seed beneath the maple tree. 2 sparrows arrived first, followed by a bright red cardinal. Hazel stood perfectly still, as though the birds had trusted her with a secret. Caroline placed 3 glasses on the patio table. She still lived in the townhouse. She had received a modest raise at the nonprofit and continued contributing to Hazel's college account every month. She no longer sent me bills disguised as updates or treated an emergency as proof that I should intervene. When she needed help, she asked. Sometimes I said yes. Sometimes I said no. Neither answer was treated as a measure of love. The trust remained unchanged. I still managed it, but I stopped mentioning it during disagreements. The house was occupied by a family with 2 young children who paid rent under a standard lease. Its income covered taxes, insurance, repairs, and the trust's long-term obligations. It was no longer a prize waiting at the end of Caroline's obedience. It was simply an asset Robert and I had protected. Ethan continued attending treatment and making payments on the debt. His progress was uneven. There were months when Caroline believed he was becoming honest and others when she kept every conversation brief and documented. His relationship with Hazel followed a structured schedule. No one pretended treatment erased what he had done. But no one taught Hazel that a person's worst failure had to become the only truth ever told about them. We did not discuss Ethan that afternoon. Hazel told me about the garden she wanted to plant outside the townhouse. Caroline described a fundraising dinner she was organizing. I listened without offering to call donors, rewrite the budget, or solve problems she had not asked me to solve. When I rose from my chair, my knee stiffened. I paused with one hand against the table. A year earlier, Caroline would have rushed forward and taken my arm without asking. I would have resisted, then complained that no one ever helped me. This time, she remained where she was. "Do you want a hand?" she asked. I looked at her open palm. "Yes," I said, "just this time." She helped me stand and released me as soon as I found my balance. It was a small moment, almost invisible from the outside. But our family had once been built on assumptions: who would pay? Who would rescue? Who was entitled to decide? And who was expected to surrender? Now we asked. Now we answered honestly. Now love was allowed to exist without an invoice attached to it. We never became the family we had been before. We became something harder to build and easier to trust. A family in which love was no longer measured by who paid, who owed, or who surrendered first. For years, I had believed protecting my daughter meant standing between her and every consequence. In the end, the most loving thing I ever did was step aside and trust that she could learn to stand.